Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back, to chapter 49 of 3 books. Yes, you are listening to an epic 14-year-long countdown of the world's 1,000 most formative books, 3 books at a time. We are doing this show 100% ad-free, sponsor-free, interruption-free, commercial-free, live and in person. Every single chat is live and in person. With who? With inspiring and intriguing people. Like Chapter 6 in Key West, Florida, with the one and only Judy Blume. Or Chapter 32 in Toronto, Canada, with the viral mommy blogger sensations, Kat and Nat. Or, as we did in Chapter 48, just the last chapter, we sit down with Michael Bungay Stanier, author of The Coaching Habit and the brand new book, The Advice Trap. Today, I am super excited. On this worm moon, on this super moon, yes, the name of the full moon today is the worm moon, and it is one of only 2 supermoons in 2020. By the way, side note, supermoon is when the moon is the closest to the Earth. It looks 30% brighter, 16% bigger. That's a giant moon up there, everybody. Well, on this worm moon, on this supermoon, we're sitting down with Dr. Andrea Sereda. Dr. Andrea Sereda is a physician who practices street outreach medicine. She provides care through the London Intercommunity Health Centre in London, Ontario, Canada. Working with the Emergency Safer Supply Substitution Program, she prescribes hydromorphone, an opioid used by injection drug users to reduce the risk of contaminated street drugs. There is a lot to say on the work that she does. You are about to hear about it in this show. I will say, as a side note, that this opioid epidemic is something that none of us can ignore, okay? It is on the cover of our newspapers every single day. Between now, or the beginning of this chapter, chapter 49, and the end, 10 people will die. Just in the time of this podcast from opioid-related drug overdoses. That may not sound like a lot. 10, isn't the world like 8 billion people? How do you kind of metric size that, you know? But what I will say is when you look at the numbers, just 20 years ago in 1999, do you know how many people died of opioid-related drug addiction or drug overdoses in the entire United States? I do, because I looked it up on Wikipedia. It was 8,048. And what about now? Well, the most recent data we have, which is still only 3 years old, is 47,600. This is emerging as a gigantic societal ill and crisis, and Dr. Andrea Sereda has some very provocative, sometimes controversial views on why drugs should be decriminalized, why we should give drugs to drug users, to use her own word, why we stigmatize people in our community who suffer or live with things like mental illness and drug addiction and homelessness. We get into a lot of deep topics in chapter 49. We do all of this inside the Sherbourne Health Centre on the east side of Toronto in an area of the city known for its challenges with drug abuse. Andrea was gracious to give us her 3 most formative books and share so much of her life, her journey, and her practice with all of us in this chapter of the show. I find her totally inspiring. I hope you do too, and I hope you enjoy chapter 49. Now let's go. Okay, just press record. Hi, Andrea. It's
Hi,
Andrea.
Neil.
Is it Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea.
You know, when you read the name Andrea, you can't tell how it's pronounced.
You cannot. No.
So what is the clue for a person who has a friend named Andrea/Andrea?
Probably go with Andrea first. I think it's like 90% Andreas, but I always say Andrea like 90210. And I think we're the same generation. So now you'll remember that.
The one actress who was in her 40s playing a teenager.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Andrea. That's so funny to cite it to 90210. And thank you guys for meeting me here. It was a couple years ago that we met at the Top 40 Under 40 Gala Awards, where you were celebrated for your crowning achievement of being one of Canada's top 40 under 40, I guess, people. And because I remember that room specifically, it was a lot of bankers and lawyers and bankers and lawyers and accountants and bankers and lawyers. And then, I was like, this is great. And these people definitely deserve to be celebrated. And then I remember asking you what you did. And you said something like
I think I said a non-PC version of I give drugs to people who use drugs.
Yes, you did. And
yes.
you caught me, and I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, you're really interesting. And so we've kept in touch now for 2
Mm.
years since that non-PC conversation.
Yeah.
And you're still giving drugs to people who use drugs.
I am.
And we're now sitting in a place right now called the Sherborne Health Center.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in downtown Toronto. This place is in a part of the town I think you would say is known for drug use.
Actually, I think it would. Yeah. I mean, Sherburne and Dundas, and I'm not from Toronto, so I'm speaking a little bit out of context.
I don't mean known for drugs.
Yeah.
Like that's the part of the city that people do drugs. I just mean like, I drove in here and, there's a couple vans outside that look like they drive around specifically handing out needles or
Yes.
We're across from Moss Park, which I believe is one of the first.
Yeah, Moss Park was the site of the first actually unsanctioned overdose prevention site in Ontario. So and that's just 10 minutes from
here. And when
here.
the Occupy movement was going on, that was like right here. That was like turned into all town. So we're in a part of downtown Toronto that, and also I think Jarvis, the street over, is, historically in Toronto was you drove up Jarvis and there was a lot of sex workers or prostitutes or whatever the word you use is, kind of on the corners. That was it was well known. In fact, there's a derisive word for a restaurant around here called Hooker Harvey's.
Oh my goodness!
Did you know it was called that?
I did not
know
that.
I just remember growing up, everyone would refer to that Harvey's. There's a Harvey's hamburger joint as Hooker Harvey's. For some reason, it had that derisive word. So we're in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. And I want to be careful on language because I want to use the right language, but I also don't know the right language. That's why I'm talking to you. And then tell me more about the Sherburne Health Center or health centers like this. What are they?
Yeah, so I work in London, Ontario at the London Intercommunity Health Center, and we're sitting here at the Sherburne Health Center.
Right.
Yeah. So both of these health centers are part of a network of community health centers in Ontario. And we all have the same mandate, which is to provide healthcare to people who have barriers to healthcare in the traditional system. So my practice centers around people living in homelessness, women involved in the survival sex trade, people who inject drugs, and they serve a similar population here at Sherburne as well, which is kind of some of the neighborhood that you were talking about.
Is it government funded?
It is.
These places are government funded?
They are. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's great that they exist, but they're outside of the traditional hospital structure.
They are.
Yeah.
And I think and we work a little bit differently in community health centers than other family doctors' offices. So we have what we call low barrier or no barrier care. So at least in my clinic, patients are able to drop in when they need to. We have longer appointment times. We've got lots of extra services like outreach workers and social workers and everything they kind of need to wrap around them for service. And then we also then do untraditional kind of ways of meeting patients. So, for example, I go out and I do street outreach medicine. You can look across the parking lot here and you can see the Sherburne Health Bus. So we provide care where people are. And that's a key, that's kind of a key harm reduction phrase we can talk about is meeting people where they're at.
Yeah. And you're using lots of phrases that I want to go into detail. Survival sex trade. I'm like, what is that? Harm reduction. Tell me more. So I want to get into all that and we're gonna. But I also want to talk about your 3 most formative books because you grew up in small town Ontario, outside of London, Ontario, and you told me that one of your first most formative books was, in fact, the Star Trek Klingon Dictionary. I am holding that red paperback in my hand right now. It was published in 1985 by Pocket Books, a division of Simon & Schuster. Dewey Decimal, folks, file this one under 791.45. Yes, indeed, it is under television. What an insult to this dictionary to file under television. But it's a small red paperback, sold over 300,000 copies. How I feel embarrassed by that number because it's such, it's literally a Klingon dictionary. And on the cover it says Star Trek, the official guide to Klingon words and phrases by Mark Okrand, Okrand. The Klingon dictionary's got like a Star Trek symbol. You know what that is, and I don't. It's like a 3.
That's actually the Klingon symbol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not the Star Trek
symbol. Not
symbol.
the Federation symbol.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. And this is English to Klingon, and importantly, Klingon to English. So in case you are a native Klingon speaker, you know how to translate
And you may want to know the dictionary is actually online. So if you need like in the moment translation, you can access that as well.
This is awesome. So we're going to get into all harm reduction, survival sex trade, the giving drugs to drug users that you do. And this is part of the work you do that's so inspiring, and I can't wait to talk about it. But walk me through your upbringing. Get me to
Yeah.
the Andrea of today.
I think this is because when we originally talked, I gave you all these like nice science books that are all about harm reduction. You're like, no, tell me about your childhood. So I gave you the Klingon dictionary, and you went with it.
And what did this do for you as a child growing up in small town Ontario?
I think it's representative of who I was as a kid and what I was interested in. And I got this dictionary for Christmas. I couldn't tell you how old I was, but it was definitely at Christmas. And it's because I was a total Trekkie nerd, right? Like many of my early childhood memories is me laying underneath the coffee table in our living room at home and watching the original Star Trek series.
Wow.
So I was probably, gosh.
Why under the coffee table?
Why not?
Oh, okay. I thought you were like sent to bed and you had snuck back down.
No. It was just like
illicit
it was like
Star Trek.
No, it was like my childhood spot where I kind of laid to watch TV. Yeah. Anyways,
That does sound oddly comforting.
Yeah, it was my little TV cave.
What kind of coffee table was it?
It was wooden.
Yeah, like a wood. You
and
lay
it was
on
large,
you lay on a carpet.
and I would I'd get a pillow and a blanket and go underneath and watch Star Trek.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's very cozy. Very rarely do we watch TV with some sort of short roof over our heads. And I do think that provides some extra degree of comfort.
Yeah.
I also think that slightly akin to like the drive-through movie or
Okay.
drive-in movie. You know,
Yeah.
you're in your car.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was my own little spot.
Yeah. And did that you became a doctor. So
Right.
clearly you followed this passion
Well, first
for
I wanted to be an
science.
astronaut.
you
I failed at being an astronaut, and so therefore I am a doctor.
Yeah, this is your plan B.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you go from a Trekkie-loving, nerdy, sci-fi-loving kid into, I believe you did a bachelor's in science?
So I did a HB SC in microbiology and immunology.
Okay.
And then I
HBSc,
did
honors bachelor
of
and then you
science.
did
And then I did med school, and then I did a residency in family medicine, and then an extra year in emergency medicine.
so this is how we migrate you up a little bit. And you told me that also as you were getting older, and I know because we were both under 40 a couple years ago that you're either
I'm still under 40.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
amazing. I'm not. I won that award as a squeaker. I got it right in before the buzzer. You were like one of these high-flying 35-year-olds or something that won it. But you also told me, and this I want to transition this into your second book, and this is not a book. It's one of the very few books in our top 1,000 that's not a book. You told me that from 1987 to 1995, and I'm going to ask you how old you were-ish. You were probably in your
Teens. Yeah.
early teens, right? Because I would be 15. You're younger than me. You read religiously a column in the back. Oh, by the way, for anyone listening, we're in like this cafeteria type thing in the foyer, so you will hear people come in and out and people talk in the background. We love background noise on 3 Books. You read a column in the back of Spin magazine, right, Andrea? Called Words from the Front. It was written by Celia Farber. It was a monthly column that originally dealt with AIDS denialism. What happened was Celia Farber was an intern at Spin magazine, and she heard about a mixture derived from eggs that could potentially cure AIDS. The quote from her, which is on her Wikipedia profile, says, "I was very young, and I believed instantly in the mythological fantasy that there was a, quote, cure for AIDS that was being suppressed by the government and the pharmaceutical industry." So for 8 straight years, she wrote a column, a very provocative, science-based, but also questionable science-based column called Words from the Front. So I'd like you to sort of now map us upwards a little bit in your from under the coffee table trajectory as a quiet nerd who's aspiring towards med school into a teenager who's reading this sort of drug-related column in Spin. So I want to spend a little time on that version of you, and then we're going to get into the drug stuff.
Totally, yeah. So I went from being a super nerdy, Trekkie young child to being a wannabe punk rocker, grunge-loving adolescent. And so with that, in the early 90s came all the music magazines that went around that, and Spin was my favorite one of those. So I initially started reading
Why?
I don't know.
Am I correct in assuming that Rolling Stone was much larger?
I think it was larger. I think, and I'm totally pulling from the dregs of my memory here, but Rolling Stone seemed to be a little more mainstream, maybe.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Spin had again all the alternative and grunge bands at the time that were kind of like preeminent in my teenage years. So that was the one I gravitated towards, and so I picked it up for the music. But yet, like you said,
What bands?
Smashing Pumpkins. Yes, I followed them around for a summer.
No way.
Way.
What do you mean followed them around for a
Well,
summer?
around Ontario. So
Like to multiple concerts?
Went to multiple shows.
Like how many shows?
I think I went to 5 in a summer.
Like mosh
in
pit
the area.
style?
Yeah.
You were at the front?
I was at the Girls to the Front.
Girls to the Front.
Girls to
You're
the Front.
hearkening us back to
90s
Debbie
culture.
Stoller, our interview with
Absolutely.
the editor of Bust Magazine. So I think you may have listened to that, but you that was like third wave feminism, I believe,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Girls to the Front. So you were in that. Cool.
Yeah.
Favorite song?
Oh, fuck. Oh. Am I supposed to say that? That's totally
it's
fine.
It's fine
okay.
to swear. We want people to be themselves.
Honestly, today, I know that's like, again, the eminent Smashing Pumpkins song, but I think that was the one that introduced me to them, and it kind of grew from there. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And the best video.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So you followed them around for the summer. You picked Spin because it was the non-mainstream music mag, and then you discovered this column called Words from the Front.
and
Tell
then-
us about this column.
So, like you said, it was the back page in Spin magazine. So I think I just, stumbled across it because, I mean, the internet didn't really exist yet. You couldn't do Twitter, Instagram. So you actually read magazines like cover to cover. That's what at least I did as a kid. And it was on the back page. And even though I was, pretending to be a punk rocker, I still had that science streak in me. So I initially found it super interesting to be reading about this science, about this disease that still at that time nobody was really talking about, at least not in my, sphere of interest. And I found it
at that
fascinating.
point, would it be fair to say AIDS was an epidemic?
It
Probably
was.
still is now, but it was it was the biggest epidemic of the time.
Yeah, and at that point still, and I want to be careful with my words. I don't think we had really great treatment in the early '90s. Still, it was still in communities that were largely marginalized from traditional healthcare. Again, like men who have sex with men or people who are injecting drugs. And I think I mentioned this to you in my emails. I went back and read it now, and kind of as a doctor, approaching 40 now, I can appreciate this was a journalistic take on science. But at the time, it was revolutionary to me in learning the science of HIV, but also seeing how a community was responding to help itself when they felt nobody else was helping them. Right?
Yeah.
So it was
how a community helps themselves when they feel nobody else is helping them.
Yes.
And how do they do that?
Yeah. So you can argue about kind of the perceptions that Celia Farber presented in some of those columns. And again, going back and reading them, I don't agree with everything that was in those columns. But people were trying. They felt nobody else was. They felt government wasn't developing therapies. They felt that people didn't have access to treatment. They felt marginalized and stigmatized. So people were coming together as a group to try, to try and figure this out, right? And to try to create advocacy and grassroots organizing.
Part of the reason this column was controversial, based on the research I did before challenging you, is because she also presented very strong opinions of the denialists.
Yeah.
People that were like, AIDS doesn't come from HIV, for example.
Yeah.
And her view was, and she has quotes about this, she's like, I'm not supporting every opinion I present. I'm trying to show every opinion, which I thought was a very valuable point. And by the way, same as 3 books. I'm interviewing people to try to learn more. It's not because I support every single thing everyone says in the show. Of course not. The whole point is to learn. We're trying to learn together. And then interestingly, she also was heralded, however you say that word, as like the forefront voice to do all this groundbreaking journalistic research on how terrible this anti-AIDS medicine called AZT was for people. And she actually exposed how the FDA rushed it through. She interviewed scientists that were like, I was on that committee. We didn't do any testing. She talked to people that were like on it and how like it was destroying their bodies. And I believe she was recognized, like prize-worthy recognition for people saying like, you exposed the true issue of this anti-AIDS medication, AZT, and how it's suppressing all other medications. So there was that whole like, there's
interplay between government and pharmacy and regulatory bodies and money making and activism. And
that's the thing I was focusing on. You today feel like a real activist to me.
I think I've been put in that role. I'm sure we're going to talk about that, but yeah, it certainly feels that way.
You give drugs to drug users, and we're going to talk about what that means.
Absolutely.
Okay. But this is an activist magazine article. That's why when you presented it to me, I was like, let's throw it in there. It's not technically a book, but it seems to have stoked some fires in your pumpkins following days.
And as a teenager, I always joke I kind of fell into what I was doing right now. And so as a teenager, I wasn't making big plans to get into activism, but I think, and you kind of forced me to do this, is to reflect back over the decades and kind of see themes that have come through. And I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I was always into this.
Yeah. So now you're a teenager. These fires have partially been stoked. So take me up now to your late teens, your 20s, and walk me through a little bit of biography here, relationship here, and open up whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah. So coming, I think I entered a pretty typical path after that. So to get into medical school, you have to be pretty focused, right? So undergrad was pretty focused on achievement and marks and getting into med school. Med school was focused on, doing well, getting through, achieving, getting into a residency program. So did all that kind of on the path to be an emergency medicine physician. So that was my goal, and I achieved that. And then as we talked about...
That's worth pausing on. Okay, you're the first doctor we've ever had on, or the second doctor after Dr. Jen Gunter, author of the Vagina Bible, on 3 books. And as a guy who grew up Indian, where everyone was supposed to become a doctor, and I did not, I'm like, just props.
You're feeling
it. You did it. Like you got into med school and you did it and you became a doctor. Like, we need doctors.
Well, thank you.
And they're such a valuable part of society. And just for anyone listening who's a doctor, like, thank you for keeping us healthy.
Right.
This is so important, and it takes such hard work. And thank you. You're a doctor. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I made it through. I was a doctor. We got through our 20s. We put our head down. Now I'm a doctor. And I think, and we've talked about this a little. So suddenly I'm a doctor. I think I'm arrived. My life is about to start. And what actually happened was my life fell apart. So, without going into exact details, someone really close to me suffered the consequences of drug use and mental illness, and that really tore my entire life apart for about 3 or 4 years, kind of trying to help that person, cleaning up from the mess that resulted from it. And I came out of that experience just, upside down and sideways. So coming out of it, kind of the life plan that I had for myself just no longer applied. And there was...
So how old were you when you graduated from med school?
From med school, I guess I would have been 27, but then from residency, I would have been 30.
So the stuff you just talked over and your eyes glistened and I saw your words speed up a bit.
Right.
Are you able to pause on that for a bit, or is that...
Sure, yeah, we'll pause.
So go back a couple of years. You're graduating, you're in med school. What happened?
So med school was okay, and residency was okay, and pretty much the start of my life troubles ended pretty much exactly at the end of residency, right? So a tough transition. You've done all this work in your 20s. You've prepared for a life as a practicing physician. You enter into the world as a practicing physician and think that you're about to build your career and do great things.
You're in a relationship.
And then life has other ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
So what happened? What did life do?
So again, I'm trying to be a little careful with my words and preserve other people's confidentiality.
Say it however is most comfortable. And as I promised you before, we'll both listen after.
Okay.
And anything you want to change, we can. But
Perfect.
I just want to pause on, because I feel like it is the formative thing for
I would
you.
say it is the formative thing for me. Yeah. So I'll say I lost kind of the most important relationship in my life to drug use and mental illness. And there was domestic violence mixed in with that as well. And it really took 4 years out of my life, right?
4 years.
Yeah. Both dealing with the immediate repercussions of it and then trying to put my own life back together and not really having a clue what that should look like, right? Everything that you think is going to happen in your life is no longer there. And I think it taught me, coming out of that, it taught me a lot about how the world perceives people with mental illness, how our healthcare system treats people with mental illness and substance use, what's available for them and what's not available for them.
So how does it feel to lose someone to drug use and mental illness? What does that look like up close? That means someone
in
close
the
to you
moment,
does drugs and then they
right. I mean, it feels like a giant crater, right? It feels, because you're dealing with all of their personal issues and personal illnesses, but then you're also dealing with a system that really has nothing for them, right? You want to help this person in your life, and there is nothing that is actually helpful to them.
Because what is the system today? And I'm not just talking about Canada. I'm talking about, let's talk globally here. If you have severe mental illness or you have abused drugs or used drugs to the point where you are now using drugs, or you have mental illness because of the drugs, or what kind of safety net we got today?
Not much. So I don't think it's any secret that mental health care in Ontario is broken, right? We have an absolute lack of psychiatrists. We have a hospital-based system that's based on, admitting to people to hospital, trying to get them better in a short period of time, referring them out to, in many cases, non-existent outpatient services. And even within
you say Ontario, but I mean, I just watched a Patriot Act episode from Hassan Minhaj, and it was like he painted a portrait of mental health care in the States, and it was like, it sounds as bad or worse,
right?
Like they recommend you to someone who's dead. He said they recommend you to McDonald's. They said they recommend you to a phone number that is actually McDonald's and it's 600 miles away from you, and you can't get access, and the insurance claim will definitely be denied because it'll be proven that you don't need the person. They interviewed a guy on the show whose daughter had attempted suicide multiple times, and the insurance claim said not a severe enough case. She has to have attempted suicide more times to qualify for mental health coverage. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I mean, we're not America, and I'm thankful we're not America. So it's not.
But we're also pretty developed.
We are.
Canada and the States. I mean, I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of the world that's probably not even there yet. They won't even recognize mental illness as an illness.
Yes.
So we got everything missing.
We've got everything missing. And especially with people who use drugs, there's this feedback loop where their mental illness gets blamed on their drug use. So they have to clean up their drug use before they can have their mental illness treated, except their mental illness is driving their drug use. And so it's this giant, I don't know what, chasing its tail of not being able to get care and get appropriate care.
And does this, I'm padding it here, but does this third book enter the picture at some point?
Not yet, actually.
Okay.
So
now what do? You got
so we
you
came out of
lose a
all
number
this.
of years of your life to the fact that you lose a person close to you to drug use and mental illness. Now where do you go?
So moving out of that and reflecting kind of...
Thank you for letting me pause like a typhoon on top of that there.
Okay.
I just wanted to...
I know, it's hard. It's hard, but it needs to
deeply
be out there.
recessed thing here, but let's talk about
and so trying to do my own healing and try to figure out how do I use my experience so that it's valuable to me and valuable to other people. Kind of coming out of that in the short term, I recognized how I was able to survive a situation of domestic violence because I had such strong family support, because I had financial resources, because I had a job that wouldn't fire me when I was, in the middle of it. And
where are you working?
I was at the hospital at the time and emerged.
Yeah.
Recognizing that all of that around me allowed me to come through it. And most women don't have that. Almost none of them do, actually. So
you're an emergency room medical doctor with a strong family around you.
And it was still a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it was still a horrible nightmare that at times I didn't know how I was going to get through it, but got through it. And then came out of it and said, like, holy shit, like, what do I do for other women? And so it was one of those, it was one of those moments when kind of the sun shined down through the clouds and I was off. Yeah. And what I mean by that is I was... offered a position at London Intercommunity Health Center, caring for women in the survival sex trade.
Like what? Like a building, an institution somewhat similar to the one we're sitting in today in downtown Toronto?
Yeah.
Okay. You were offered a position. That just happened?
Well, I was already working at Intercommunity Health,
Okay.
caring for people living with homelessness.
Okay.
Another physician was retiring from
By the way,
practice.
is that the right phrase? I'm learning living with homelessness.
People living with homelessness.
Oh, interesting.
Or living in homelessness.
So you don't say
yes.
homeless people anymore.
I try not to.
Because?
Because no, but it puts their situation ahead of the person. So calling them
interesting.
homeless people instead of people living with homelessness. So
Right.
acknowledging them as
So
individuals
you already work with
first.
people living with homelessness.
Yes.
Now that migrated into this role,
Yeah.
working with London's Intercommunity Health
So I was
Centre.
offered this role, providing medical care to women in the survival sex trade. And I'm like, aha. Maybe I can use some of my experiences to leverage for these women. And
What is the survival sex trade?
So it's
I'm
women.
smiling because I've asked you this before 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what it was. So I want you to tell us all what it is.
So women in the survival sex trade sex for money, food, drugs, a place to stay, protection. So, which is a different layer of sex work than women who are maybe involved in escorting or involved in massage parlors. So these are women in the survival sex trade, or the women that you're going to see standing out on the street that we talked about.
They are women who trade sex for money,
Food,
shelter.
drugs, shelter,
Drugs.
your basic life necessities.
Some people might say drugs are not a basic life necessity.
And I would argue that sometimes they are. And we
Cut.
will.
Because subplot.
Subplot. So when
Yeah.
we get to, some people are dealing with such significant life circumstances or mental illness that in that moment, drugs are actually a very reasonable choice in their life.
Okay, because the alternatives would be,
Because the alternatives is living with your reality.
and the reality might be,
Sleeping on the street and doing 18 hours of survival sex work a day.
18 hours of survival sex work.
Yes. So I'm being a little bit hyperbolic.
No, don't be. It wasn't that I'm skeptical of. It's like, what does that look like as a life? Can you color in that portrait of the person that you're now working with here? Because the survival sex trade is something that I knew nothing about. I didn't even know the phrase of it. And talk to me about that subset of our.
Yeah, so
of
we
our
know,
society,
at least
yeah.
in London, Ontario, there's about 150 women in the survival sex trade.
And this is a city of 300,000 people.
Yeah, about
So
300,000
300,000 people, 150
About
women
150.
working in this industry.
So it's 100
Toronto would be a lot bigger.
many folds greater than that. And so again, like I said, these are the women that you see out on the street, on the corners, looking to sell sex, usually out of cars, sometimes out of rooms, sometimes out of hotel rooms. But they'll stand, they will sell their services. They will usually get a small amount of money, $40 or $50, usually depending on the service. Then many of the women will, again, then use it for basic necessities. So maybe they go get something to eat. Maybe they go get some drugs. And then when they need their next allotment of money, they're back out there and working for it.
What is usually the path in and out of this industry, the survival sex industry? What's
Poverty.
Poverty.
So poverty is the bedrock of all of this. And then built on that are kind of adaptations and consequences of poverty. So we could say mental illness or homelessness are consequences of poverty. And then an adaptation to that is drug use.
Sorry, mental illness and homelessness are a consequence of poverty?
Absolutely.
So what I hear you're saying is that if you are in poverty, can you define poverty for me? What's
Oh
poverty?
gosh. I mean,
I don't mean the dictionary, but you don't have to do it in Klingon.
not having enough, not a Klingon, right? Not having enough money to meet your basic needs in
so
life.
if you don't have enough money to meet, because how does that cause mental illness?
Yeah, and I think kind of in the popular media and and maybe a more normative understanding of mental illness, people think mental illness causes poverty and homelessness.
Yeah.
No, not having somewhere to sleep, being wet in the park and sleeping there all winter and not having enough to eat and being scared you're going to beat up and lose your shoes, that's going to make you unwell. It's going to make you physically unwell and it's going to make you mentally unwell. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
and we see the opposite as well. So when we're able to get people housed and cared for, often many of their symptoms of mental illness resolve.
Never mind the loneliness.
Correct.
Because you've always, and maybe it's just popular media. I've often heard that, the worst thing that can happen to you in jail is what's it called?
Just the isolation of jail.
The isolation of jail, but also the hole, or I'm
yes,
I'm referring to like movies. They throw the guy in the hole. That's your punishment. You're now away from everybody. Like the punishment in the movies is like loneliness. But meanwhile, you're saying if you're in poverty, if you are homeless, now you've got that's your life.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we got onset of mental illness potentially as well, if you maybe are susceptible to it, or if you have,
or just because you're sleeping on the street, right? So
what kind of mental illnesses are we talking about? Give me some most common sort of.
Obviously,
illnesses.
You're going to be depressed if you're sleeping on the concrete.
Right.
You're going to be anxious.
Right.
Often, you may have symptoms of panic.
Right.
You're certainly going to develop PTSD, especially if you're a woman living on the street and living within the violence that is often present in street. I don't want to say street culture. I'll say on the street. You may develop a substance use disorder, as we mentioned, to cope with all of that, and so it all just comes together in a giant cluster.
Yeah, and is the survival sex trade industry growing or shrinking as a whole?
I don't have a good answer for that.
Is this an industry that exists in pretty much every city?
Absolutely. It's in every city.
So invisible, though.
Absolutely. I don't think it's invisible if you know where to look. Yeah.
What does that mean? It's invisible.
I think it's invisible because a lot of people choose not to see it.
But it's also not covered in media. It's not really in the newspapers. I'm just saying, I'm a 40-year-old man, as you know, from the award we both got. I'm I didn't really know about this industry. I that probably sounds so ignorant.
Yeah, it's present. I would say maybe not. Small towns will have less, but in any city that has poverty, which is every single Canadian city, there is going to be a survival sex industry.
Can you also just take me up the tree diagram of the sex work industry? So you got the survival sex rate, and then you're saying there's also things like escorts, things like the other. We interviewed a former sex worker on 3 books named Juniper Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
She wrote the world's first ever children's book featuring a sex working parent. I think the part of the sex work industry she was talking about largely was a different one.
Absolutely.
Right? Would you call it the non-survival?
I guess it would be not. Isn't all work survival in the end? But so I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that sex work is a tree. It's not a hierarchy of different kinds of sex work. But I would certainly say there's different categories with different objectives, right? So I certainly strongly believe that sex work is real work. So you can have women in the escorting industry. That's real work for a real wage. There's women who work, essentially we used to call it the back pages, which is similar to escorting, but it's arranging for sex work to happen either in your place of business or in your home. And so those women are
You're referring to the back pages of a newspaper.
Correct.
All those classified ads.
All those classified ads, right? And then there's the women that I take care of who sell their services by standing on the street.
But it's
it's a network, maybe. Is a network a better word?
You're helping us categorize it, and I appreciate that. And I know I'm asking a lot of dumb questions, but it helps us picture it. Now, you then get the opportunity to work in this industry. You're in London, Ontario. You're you had this formative life experience where someone very close to you kind of goes down the pathway of drug abuse, mental illness. You're how can I help other people like me, potentially, who have a partner or a relationship, maybe? So then you get this opportunity to work in the London Health Center.
Correct.
How old are you now?
I would be 35 or 6 at this point.
So this is not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
I know you're under 40.
39 and a squeak. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Then what happens?
So
I feel like there's an awakening.
There is an awakening. It's coming.
So give it to me.
All right. So I'm entering into this program, and it's called Streetlevel Women at Risk. So essentially, I'm providing medical care for a housing first program. So housing first is another philosophy I can tell you about. And housing first works to house people with no preconditions to that housing. So it used to be the idea, if someone is so mentally ill, they're so sick, we can't get them housed, it's just not going to work out. Housing housing first goes on the absolute other side of that and says housing is a precondition to health and wellness. We're going to house you no matter what. So Streetlevel Women at Risk houses women in the survival sex trade, and then I provide medical care for that program. So that's how it started. But then working with these women, there was the common theme of substance use, and it was predominantly injection drug use. And what I recognized
when I hear the phrase injection drug use, what drugs does that mean?
Can be anything, honestly. So most of my patients are injecting opioids, which right now with the street supply is fentanyl largely.
Fentanyl. That's also opioids. Also includes heroin.
Correct. Yep.
Is there any other opioids besides heroin and fentanyl?
Oh, lots. So
What's
there's
opioids?
lots of opioids is a class of drugs that would include prescribed
Heroin,
medications like morphine,
morphine.
Percocet. You've heard of OxyContin in the
okay.
media. So all of those drugs.
It means
are
anything
opioids.
coming from the opium plant.
Essentially,
Okay, got it.
essentially.
Super strong painkillers.
Super strong painkillers. And you asked about injection drug use. You can also inject stimulants like cocaine and crystal meth, and the women do that too. So I'm working with this program. We're getting people housed. We're doing good and hard work. But I also reflect on how hard it is to stabilize the substance use of these women. So these are women who are in and out of hospital frequently with overdoses, especially as fentanyl becomes more predominant, with infectious complications of their drug use, which would be things like heart infections or abscesses, that type of thing, or just being really sick by what they have to do to get their drugs. Right. So acknowledging that although sex work is real work, they may not want it to do it as much or in the way that they are doing it.
And you have told me in a previous conversation that it's often violent. There's often a lot of physical abuse.
In this part of the industry, it can be. Yeah. So again, many of the women are living with PTSD and the consequences of kind of the life that they have been in for some time. So at that point, there's traditional ways to help stabilize people's substance use, and that can include drugs like methadone or Suboxone that you may have heard about in the media as well.
I've heard of methadone.
Yeah.
I don't know Suboxone, but that's okay.
Same type of idea. Okay, we don't need to talk about the specifics. And many of these women have tried those over and over, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't work for them, right? Whether it's kind of limitations on how they can access the clinic, or often it's because those substitution drugs don't give them what they need.
The high.
Which quite frankly, at some points in their life, they need to survive their life.
That's a belief you have.
That is a belief I have that's
I'm not saying that shared by
many people who use drugs and advocates who work with them.
Okay.
So
I'm leaning into you, but I'm also just saying that's a belief, not a fact, right?
What part is a belief
like that,
versus a fact?
The high that they can't get off methadone, etc. Therefore, they need the real thing.
Exactly.
And that's a belief you have. You get.
Yes.
So then you're take us. So then
we'll take you even further here, and I'll explain. So it's a long story. I know.
No. I like the story because you're doing something very progressive, very unusual, very new, and very provocative here.
Right.
And you're teaching us as we listen to this how you get to that point. And I'm not trying to rush you. I just want to keep asking questions so that I can keep coloring it in for me and for people listening on like how you, Andrea Sereda, got to this point and what you're doing, because I know it's empowering work, and it certainly is. It's won awards, as I know from how I met you.
Yeah. And so at this point, so how I got to the next step is there was a doctor in our local hospital who would give injectable hydromorphone, which again is a type of opioid, in hospital to help people stay out of withdrawal and stay in the hospital long enough to complete their medical therapy. And so that worked really well. People would stay in the hospital. They would get their heart infections treated. Everything would be going in the right direction. And then this other physician, she would discharge them on tablet hydromorphone on a weaning dose to, take out into the community and find follow-up care. And because I take care of this group of patients, often they were my patients. So we'd see them come out of hospital, and they would have these prescriptions for opioids, and all of the positive benefits that they achieved in hospital would be sustained. And then we would do the typical thing, which is try to convert them to the standard medications like methadone or Suboxone, and the wheels would fall off the bus again. So often they would go back to the street supply. Often they would go back to, you know, the ways of seeking, obtaining drugs that were not healthy for them in the past. Often they would get infections again, and we would just start the cycle all over again. So at some point I said, they were well. We took them off something that was keeping them well. What if we just continued it? And so we did that for an initial just 3 patients who were super sick from the way they were using drugs. And I continued those prescriptions and they got better. And so
How do you define got better?
So they were no longer in hospital for overdose. They were no longer in hospital for infections. They were able to maintain housing. They were able to achieve healthcare. So getting their HIV treated, getting their Hep C treated, getting other chronic primary care stuff done like Pap smears. We were able to do all of that, and their substance use stabilized.
Meaning they're still on the drugs,
They're
but it's
on the
stabilized.
right. So
it wasn't like they went off the drugs.
Correct. So they are receiving the drugs that I prescribed for them, and they're only taking those. So they're no longer going to the street and buying fake pills or buying fentanyl or buying contaminated crystal meth. They're using a prescription. So not only is their health improving, but they're avoiding the harms of the street supply. So again, we went, this is kind of working. And so we slowly started to add in patients that we thought were at imminent risk of death. So again, imminent risk of death from overdose or from infections or from the way they were obtaining drugs. And the program slowly grew, and we got 2 years in and we're like, well, this is really working. And so we started to reach out to other people in the field and researchers. And it was funny. That has big air quotes around it, funny, right? We discovered we'd been doing something that it was actually a movement in the harm reduction community called Safer Supply. We had just done it because it was working for our patients and making them healthier. And actually, when we started it, we had no idea that it was this provocative thing within the harm reduction
Didn't feel
community.
Provocative to you.
It just felt like what was right. It was right for the patients,
Mm-hmm.
and it was making patients well. And a couple of years in, we discovered, hey, it's actually this thing, and this thing is called Safer Supply.
Where was that? How did you connect that to a large? What is harm reduction? What is safe supply? Just define those 2 terms for me, and then connect this provocative but also passionate and working work that you're doing with what's going on in the world around us from London, Ontario. I asked you a lot of questions there.
I know, and I got to try and sort them out of my brain. So we'll start with harm reduction. So harm reduction seeks to improve the consequences of drug use, whatever that means, right? So we have safe injection sites where we'll have a federal exemption where people can take illicit drugs that are normally illegal. They take them into a safe injection site. They use them under under the supervision of a nurse. They don't have an overdose. Like, injection sites have a 100% track record. There has never been a death. They reverse every overdose in an injection site.
Despite the fact that they're often banned from communities.
Oh, yes. And we could go down a whole nother tangent.
No,
on
I just
that.
heard the government say that they're banning this. I just heard the premier of this province say they're banning them because they don't want people to be taking those near kids and stuff like that.
Right.
Even though what you just said sounds like the opposite.
It's absolutely the opposite. So we actually know from research that people won't travel more than 500 meters to access an injection site. So everyone who doesn't want them in our neighborhood, the injection's already happening in your neighborhood, but they're currently unsafe. So you bring in
now you're going to walk by the broken syringes in the morning and stuff
correct,
like that.
yes. Whereas an injection site, we know they save lives.
Okay.
We know that they connect people with treatment, whatever that might be, kind of on that person's journey. Clean needles, like so that's all harm reduction, right?
Harm reduction, that means just reducing the harm and taking drugs.
Correct.
Okay, now Safer Supply is a tree diagram division of harm reduction.
It's just taking it to another level.
It's making the drugs themselves
if we're
safe.
going to get into kind of
can we get to the third book now?
Introduce it because we're going to it.
Okay. The third book is Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs by Johann Hari, maybe Johann Hari, Johannhari. It was published in, I'm pausing because I'm so excited about this book. I loved it. It blew me away. I made it my top book of 2019. It was published in 2015 by Bloomsbury, a division of Macmillan. Guys, file this, and this is the interesting filing here, Andrea. 363.45. Listen to the Dewey Decimal categorization here. Under social problems, controversies related to public morals and customs, drug trafficking. That's the Dewey Decimal
Okay.
filing, okay, just to kind of put some of the politicalization on even the categorization of the book. The cover of the book is paperback. It's got a guy lighting up, I guess, drugs. His head is like a silhouette in looks like a park with a dimly lit blue background and trees with sort of Christmas lights on them. 4 amazing blurbs on the cover. Stunning from Elton John. Terrific from Bill Maher. Everyone should read this book from Sam Harris, and superb storytelling and thrilling journalism from Naomi Klein. It's a New York Times bestseller, and the back says, "What if everything you think you know about addiction is wrong?" One of Johann Hari's earliest memories is trying to wake up one of his relatives and not being able to. As he grew older, he realized he had addiction in his family. Confused and not knowing what to do, he set on a 3-year, 30,000-mile journey to discover what really causes addiction and what really solves it. Johann Hari won Newspaper Journalist of the Year twice by Amnesty International. He's written for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and others, and is a regular panelist on Real Time with Bill Maher. His TED Talk, important to mention here, "Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong," has been viewed over 20 million times. Tell us about your relationship as you keep going through this story with Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari, Hari.
So I read Chasing the Scream right around the time that we were discovering that safer supply was a thing, and we recognize that people are unwell with substance use. We're giving them their substance of choice, and they're getting better. Everything about their lives is getting better. And that made us as a team reflect like, what is the actual cause of harm here? Is it the drugs, or is it the system that we create around the drugs? Are the drugs making my patients sick, or is it the fact that they're criminalized and prohibited and they have to use an unclean, unregulated, unreliable street supply? What is actually making
We've created
people
this
sick
gigantic industry through, and this, remember the subheadline of the book is The First Last Days of the War on Drugs. As he paints in this book, we've created the criminal system, the poor supply of drugs. 100 years ago, this stuff was all legal and no one was sick.
Yeah.
And no one was in hospitals.
Yeah. And we're creating, and don't get me wrong, harm reduction is a wonderful thing, and I'm a huge advocate, and I'm here at the Sherburne Health Center today because I believe in harm reduction. But harm reduction, are we treating the harms of drug use, or again, are we treating the harms of prohibition? Would we need safe injection sites if these drugs weren't illegal in the first place? Would we need clean needles if drug use was just treated as a health issue and things were legalized and regulated? Would we actually need all of these things if we hadn't created a prohibited drug market in the first place?
Part of the reason I think I'm so attracted to you and your thoughts and your work and this book is because it is so opposite of how I have felt my entire life. It is so the opposite, where I have grown up, look at the categorization in Dewey Decimal. This is how I grew up in the 80s, and all the anti-drug ads. Don't do drugs. Drugs are bad for you. War on drugs, huge problem. Eliminate from society. You know, me growing up would be so scared to try any drug because I'm like, it's going to kill me, you know, and
I want to be clear.
I know,
too.
that's where I want you to open up because that's the view I grew up with, and I think it's still a pretty commonly held view. And my own views are just getting scrambled now by talking to people like you.
And really, and those views need to be combined with what I'm presenting here. So I am not advocating wholesale that everybody should go home and do drugs. That is not what I am saying. I'm saying that we make it so much more dangerous by how we as a society react to it. So alcohol is legal and regulated. Yet we still have people who drink and drive. We still have people who die of liver disease. That still happens. Alcohol is still not a healthy and safe choice for lots of people. But when alcohol prohibition was in place, it was so much worse. You had alcohol overdoses. You had alcohol poisonings. You had all the consequences of criminalization of alcohol.
The rise of the Al Capone.
The rise of Al Capone, the rise of the concentration of alcohol. And so things were a lot worse when alcohol was prohibited. They are not perfect, but they are better now that alcohol is legal and regulated.
And there's a great metaphor in Chasing the Scream about that, saying at the average college in the United States, the football stadium has banned alcohol, yet everyone is drunk watching the game.
Exactly.
It's because when things are banned, you have to increase the concentration, reduce the size, and be able to stealthily hide it. So everyone has little pocket flasks and stuff that they sneak in with 80 proof vodka to get drunk when they would have just gone to the had a beer or two before or during. And you're saying that's partly the the illegality of it is what creates the problem.
Yes.
This is such a bizarre but
And that's
mind-blowing
exactly
argument.
what we're seeing with fentanyl. It is exactly what we're seeing with fentanyl. So in around, I think it was 2012 or 2013, OxyContin was removed from the provincial formulary because people were saying, everybody's addicted to Oxy. They're injecting it. This is a bad thing. Let's take it away because, prohibiting it must make it better because nobody is going to use it. What we actually saw then, though, was fentanyl moved in. Right. So you take away a drug that was a known dose, a known quantity, a known composition, and now we replace it with fentanyl.
Then
right?
what is the solution? Solve the drug problem for me.
Solve the drug. I mean, the first step I think we need is decriminalization. I do strongly believe in legalization and regulation, although I know we're probably...
Of everything.
Of everything.
You think everything should be legalized?
Legalized and regulated.
Heroin.
Yes.
Fentanyl.
Yes, and I mean, if you've read the book, you get to the last chapter where he talks about kind of how do we actually do this in a safe way for everybody. So I do not think this is an easy question, and I'm not sure we can get to kind of all the layers of it right now. But kind of as a broad statement, yes, I think everything should be legal and regulated. With fentanyl, I'm not sure
because it means it's safer overall, and the examples in the book, including countries that are trying that, like Uruguay, like parts of, if I'm not wrong, the Netherlands.
Yes.
Right? And,
yes.
and they have examples now that are showing,
Yeah.
even Canada, I think it was 2 years ago, they legalized cannabis. And I believe that there's now already proof starting to show a healthier supply, right? Is that not right?
I think it's early to say that.
Okay, that's just me projecting.
But I think no problem. But I think, what we do know with fentanyl right now is that every batch is different. Every batch is a different strength. Even within the batch, it's different strengths. It's contaminated. The predominant contaminant right now is caffeine, but we see GHB and ketamine and antidepressants and, cow dewormer all mixed in with our fentanyl. And that is the predominant street opioid right now. And 14 people a day are dying. 14
in Canada. What's the U.S. number?
I don't know what the U.S. number is, but it's probably 10
times the population. So this is how we've taken these 3 books. We've talked about you a lot, and I appreciate you letting us talk about you. And I know you didn't want to talk about you necessarily, but now we're in your late 30s, and to this day, you, from what I understand from earlier conversations, you walk around sometimes at night with usually police with you, and you hand out or give drugs, serious drugs.
I don't hand them out.
But but there's something where you're giving...
I'll explain. Yeah, you're going to get me in trouble here.
No, I don't. In trouble. I want to know what you do.
I'm teasing. So I do. So I do kind of what I think of as traditional clinic practice. Probably not many other people think it's traditional, but I see people in the office for safer supply. So we see them every single week. We evaluate their substance use, all their health conditions, kind of the safety factors in their life, and the people on the program receive a prescription for hydromorphone, which is the opioid that we discussed. They pick it up daily from the pharmacy. They take it home.
What is hydromorphone? Is that heroin?
It's not. It's an opioid. The brand name is Dilaudid. So it's a prescription.
A very heavy opioid.
It is. Yeah. It is heavier. It's a prescription medication that you could get from your doctor. You might be given in the hospital if you were in pain. So it's a legal prescribed opioid. Then, like I said, my patients get a prescription for that. They take it to the pharmacy. They pick it up every single day, and then they take it home and use it. So some of them swallow it. Some of them inject it. Some of them do a combination of both. And then, like I said, we see them every week, and we work on their health conditions. And we have 112 patients enrolled in this program, and overwhelmingly, they are healthier. So we're seeing transition.
Give me the metrics again. It's because you told me this before, and you mentioned earlier. So you're in the survival sex trade. Give me the metrics on healthier life now.
So for a lot of, out of the 112, everybody had an experience of homelessness. We've now housed half of those patients. We see a significant decrease in the amount of women in the survival sex trade. For the men who are in the program, we see a huge decrease in the amount of petty crime that they're engaged in. Health-wise, we have a large cohort of people living with HIV. Most of them came into the program with that HIV untreated. They are now all treated. We see changes in how people use their drugs. All of our patients came in using injection drugs. Now about a quarter of them swallow everything, and another 10% are that combination. So everybody came in with the intention to keep using drugs, and we've seen them de-escalate their use. And these are patients who have been completely outside of the traditional healthcare system. Almost none of these patients saw a doctor unless it was through Emerge and they were almost dead. And now they're coming in and seeing their family doctor every single week.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It needs to be said. Yeah. This is amazing. You're helping people's lives, and you're doing it in a way that is not typically under the flashbulbs and spotlights that work like this deserves to have.
Thank you.
And that's partly why I want you on 3 Books, because I'm so proud of you. I don't know you enough to say that, but I just mean, like, that's amazing what you're doing for people. On page 149 of Chasing the Scream, it says, I'm going to read a paragraph here. Professor Siegel's story of buzzing cows and tripping bees is, he believes, a story about us. We are an animal species. As soon as plants began to be eaten by animals for the first time, way back in prehistory, before the first human took first steps, the plants evolved chemicals to protect themselves from being devoured and destroyed. But these chemicals could, as soon turned out, produce strange effects. In some cases, instead of poisoning the plant's predators, they, quite by accident, altered their consciousness. This is when the pleasure of getting wasted enters history. All human children experience this impulse early on. It's why when you were little, you could spin around and around or hold your breath to get a head rush. You knew it would make you sick, but your desire to change your own consciousness a little to experience a new and unfamiliar rush outweighed your aversion to nausea. There has never been a society ever in which humans did not serially seek out these sensations. High in the Andes in 2000 BC, they were making pipes through which they smoked hallucinogenic herbs. Ovid said drug-induced ecstasy was a divine gift. The Chinese were cultivating opium by AD 700. Hallucinogens and chemicals caused by burning cannabis were found in clay pipe fragments in William Shakespeare's house. George Washington insisted that American soldiers be given whiskey every day as part of their rations. The ubiquity of drug use is so striking, says physician Andrew Weil, W-E-I-L, that it must represent a basic human appetite. Professor Siegel claims the desire to alter our consciousness is the fourth drive in all human minds, alongside the desire to eat, drink, and have sex. And it is biologically inevitable, as it provides us with moments of release and relief.
Well, yes, of course, right? I think one of my jokes I like to make, and it's kind of a joke and it's kind of me being provocative, but I think there's probably as much drug use on Bay Street here in Toronto as there is on the downtown east side in Vancouver.
And so for people that don't know, these references you're making, Bay Street in Toronto is the equivalent of Wall Street in New York City. That would be very high-powered, very wealthy, typically men working in suits, making millions of dollars, trading stocks, etc. And I'm totally making a bad caricature, but okay, I'll get... And then the east side of Vancouver is the most known place, potentially in North America, of drug users as a percent of the population. Yep. Meaning you drive down that street, and on both sides of the street, on both sides, for as far as the eye can see, are people doing drugs, essentially.
Yes. And so Bay Street would be a center of wealth and privilege. So people can use drugs, use pure drugs of good quality, and they have protection from the consequences of that drug use. So they have a home to go to. If their drug use gets out of control, they have family to fall back on. They probably have access to traditional treatment mechanisms. Again, they have jobs and salaries. The downtown east side, people use drugs as well, but they don't have all of those other things surrounding them. So they're homeless. They're living in poverty. They have no money. They have a community around them, but often no family to fall back on. So one group of people is able to use drugs with very little consequences, and the other is not.
Okay, I want to give two other arguments here, and I want your views on them. An article was written by you, or not by you, about you in the London Free Press. It says, the headline is, London Doctor Prescribing Opioids to Users in Bold Drug Crisis Response. A very glowing article written last year. Nice picture of you, by the way. Here's the top. I sorted all the comments. There's a lot of comments on this article. I sorted them by most likes. I'm just going to read you the top 5 or 6, okay? I am willing to pay taxes to support treatment programs to get people to kick the drug addictions, not methadone, though, as it is an addictive substance which takes 3 to 4 years to get them off. But I am not willing to see one thin dime going towards keeping them addicted and giving them drugs and tea and sympathy. The way they will get off drugs is to take personal responsibility and get help. Feeding their addiction seems to be the answer to a dream. I have taken personal responsibility to avoid drug and alcohol addiction in my life, and I expect others to do the same. Here's another comment. I have a better idea. Why don't we make it our goal to get these people off opioids? Another comment from Drew Gray. Free needles, free naloxone, free buildings to use in, and now more free drugs? If you think the extras are not being sold for money, then you're delusional at best. Yep, no problems here. All legit for all of us to see. 2 more comments I will read from Paul Hansen. And I see you laughing, but I just want to get this argument on the table for you. Any medical professional who provides drugs to addicts rather than helping them deal with their addiction should be stripped of their medical license and quite possibly charged criminally in the same manner as any street drug pusher. Seems to me that we as a society are putting far more energy into facilitating drug use than we are to treating it. To my mind, that is the fundamentally wrong model. And last one I'll read you from Brian Howard. I thought of a similar approach to handguns. Can't keep people who are choosing an unconventional employment strategy from acquiring handguns, so let's make it safer. Give them training so they're better shots. Supply ammunition that won't go through targets, thus reducing the injuries to bystanders. And maybe arming those who can't get a handgun and are in similar situations so the playing field is level. Let's make things fairer for everyone. I'm giving a sarcastic tone on that one because I assume it was written that way. So that's a lot. And that's all the top ones. So that's presumably the conventional view.
And I was laughing because everyone tells me never read the comments. And so
I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine.
Here I am throwing it at you.
Throw the comments. So we know that those viewpoints are out there for our work, but I think I really strongly oppose the personal responsibility narrative. I think it really tries to absolve the rest of us from our lack of caring, from people who are marginalized from everything that we take for granted. So I mentioned in the first part of our interview, I believe I survived domestic violence because of everybody and everything I had around me. People can survive substance use because of what they do or do not have around them. So call it personal responsibility. It's like the pull up your bootstraps argument.
In fact, it's the opposite of the afterword of this book, Chasing the Scream, which says the opposite of addiction is connection.
Right. And how can you pull up your bootstraps if you don't have any boots? So I think people who argue for personal responsibility have a profound disconnect from the lives that my patients actually live on a day-to-day basis. And I think if they truly understood what my patients have been through and are currently going through, I think we could change their mind. And that's part of what we're trying to do with the advocacy work around this is make everybody understand what lives actually look like.
It's a breath of fresh air talking to you because you are putting yourself out there and you're putting yourself out there in the work you do and by talking about it. And the reason we're at Sherborne Health Center today, I didn't even mention this, is because you're giving a talk here today because your work is being recognized, is being heralded, and is being, people are saying what Andrea Sereda is doing in London is working. Let's copy this model. Let's take it out there. This is amazing and impressive work. But I want to present both sides because the whole point is to try to get at the root of this. So now let's let you have the closing thought here. Is there a final piece of wisdom, of advice for those listening? And whether that is just the average folks like me trying to learn more about this space, give us your final thoughts on how we can sort of navigate into this world and understand it a bit better, and what advice you might have for how we live.
I mean, humans are a collective, or we should be, right? And I think we need to look at how our actions, both positive and negative, affect everybody in our community. So if we're looking at prohibition with Chasing the Scream, we need to examine how our decisions in lawmaking and the way we structured a society and how we address the actual classism and racism that is existing in Canada, how that actually affects a sizable proportion of people we live with. And I think there is a real cognitive dissonance between what Canada says it is and what it actually is for so many people. And I think, again, collectively, we need to still think about that. Maybe I'll leave you with a quote from an activist who I really admire. Her name is Karen Ward, and she works on the downtown east side. And she says, when there's no way out of your life, you start to act like it. So with Safe Supply, we are trying to give people a toehold out of their life so that we can make everything else better.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on 3 Books.
You're welcome.
When there's no way out of your life, you start to act like it. And if you feel like there is no way out of your life, if you are living with homelessness, severe mental illness, or working in the survival sex trade industry, isn't it great? Aren't we lucky that there's people like Dr. Andrea Sereda out there meeting people where they're at, to use her words, giving drugs to drug users, to use her words, helping ensure a safe supply, to use her words, and just helping people right where they are. This is a woman whose inner fire is so inspiring, whose work she's doing, depending on how you think of it, is so inspiring. It is to me. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you agree with some of the comments that we heard? Where do we net out on this stuff? This is a really, really cutting edge place of research, place of work right now in the world. And I'm so flattered and honored that Dr. Andrea Sereda was able to and willing to share her story and her formative books with us. So many quotes jump out from that conversation, like, I failed at being an astronaut, so therefore I am a doctor. In that quote, although it's just funny, I hear Andrea's humility, her servant leadership, her desire to put her incredible mind to work on areas that doctors don't always focus on. It's beautiful. How about this one? There's this feedback loop where their mental illness gets blamed on their drug use, except it's their mental illness that's driving their drug use. She really helped me kind of explore that causal effect that I guess I'd always held on mental illness. You know, she said, you know, you can get mental illness because you're living in a wet park and you're freezing cold and you have PTSD and you're worried about your safety. Of course, that makes sense when you hear her talk about it, but it's just not something that I personally had considered. It makes so much sense, but how she framed it and positioned it was, I guess for me, like the eye-opening part of it. How about this quote? Last quote, third quote. Are the drugs making my patient sick? Or is it the fact that they are criminalized and prohibited and they have to use an unclean, unregulated, unreliable street supply making my patient sick? Hugely illuminating question around drugs, drug use. Should they be legalized? What is it about drugs that is actually making people sick? Is it the drugs themselves, as I guess I've always grown up to believe and to have thought? Or is it the nature of the drugs, the illegalization of the drugs, the prohibition of the drugs, the format of the drugs, the quality of the drugs, all these other issues? This woman is on the front lines of exploring all of these. I know she probably, for many of us, maybe brought up more questions than there are answers, but I just love the work she's doing. It's super progressive and interesting, and I'm very, very curious for what you think. Give me a call, 1-833-READ-A-LOT, as always, if you want to continue the conversation. Thank you so much to Dr. Andrea Sereda for giving us 3 more books to add to our Top 1000. For those that may be new, our Top 1000 is our 14-year-long list of the 1,000 most formative books in the world. It is published online at 3books.co/the-top-1000. You can read a list of every formative book on this show. Andrea, thank you for giving us number 857, The Klingon Dictionary by Mark Okrand. Number 856, Words from the Front. Now, this is not a book, and we talked about this before, but I said, yes, include it. It was so formative to you. This is a series of monthly magazine columns that were published in Spin magazine from 1987 to 1995 and written by Celia Farber. Okay, maybe we're fudging the rules of book things there, but like it kind of, you can imagine those being put into a book, and it was very formative to Andrea, so we included it. And number 855, Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari. That was the sort of capstone book that inspired a lot of our conversation today about drugs. Okay. Letting out a deep breath is kind of what I feel like doing after listening to that conversation again, thinking about these issues and sort of like just feeling kind of in the middle of all of them. I hope you felt that that was a fun and provocative chat. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you soon. No, that's not the end. That's not the end. That was just a 3 or 4 second pause before I welcomed y'all back to the end of the podcast club. Yes, the end of the podcast club is where I talk directly to you. You talk directly to me. We play your voicemails. We read your reviews, your letters. We have a word of the chapter. We update you on values or what other guests have been up to. It's just a fun little interactive thing we do at the end of every show. It is one of 3 clubs we have for 3 Books listeners. Club number 2 is the Secret Club. Can't say more about that. You can find out more by calling our phone number, which is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. And club number 3 is the Cover to Cover Club, our special club for people that listen to every single chapter of the show, all 333 of them. So, as we always do, let's start off this end of the podcast club by going to the phones.
Hey, Neil, it's Kevin Marusik calling. I finally got around to listening to Chapter 44 and our conversation that we had back in December. Thanks so much for putting that up. And I wanted to make one tiny correction. USSR is uninterrupted, sustained, silent reading. That's all. Come by the store, say hi whenever you're here. But thanks for putting that up. I enjoyed listening to it. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you so much to Kevin Marusik, a.k.a. Kevin the Bookseller, our guest in Chapter 44 of 3 Books, for calling in with, of course, a correction. Kevin, uninterrupted, sustained, silent reading. Thank you. I don't remember what I said it stood for. Was it unlimited? That wouldn't make sense, would it? Uninterrupted. We all need more USSR in our lives. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out Chapter 44 of 3 Books. Now, it's time for the letter of the chapter, and this one comes from Vicky via a Facebook DM. She says, "Hi Neil, I'm currently living in my van in the Italian mountainside, traveling around, and your 3 Books podcast is one of my favorite evening pastimes. I love your unpretentious enthusiasm, your openness to learning, and the often inspirational people and books you have on your show. For your nerdy side, and perhaps a constructive criticism, I'd be very interested to see statistics on the guest speakers. Being naturalized Swiss from British origins, I would love to hear more diverse voices, perhaps non-Anglophone mother tongue speakers to vary the input. If you're ever able to talk with Alain de Botton or Maria Popova, that would make my day. Thank you again for the energy you instill." From Vicky, with admiration from Vicky, she says. How cool is it that we're getting letters from people like Vicky living in their van on the Italian mountainside? What a beautiful visual. Is it as romantic as I am picturing? Little dandelions sprouting out, a sideways sun, a lot of frolicking. The beautiful, fresh, clean air. Or is it hard? Is it a hard life? I don't know. Do you have to wash your clothes in like an ice-cold river? No pizzas for miles and miles around? I don't know. I'm going to go with the romantic visual. I know nothing about the Italian mountainside, as you can tell. I really appreciate your feedback. Alain de Botton and Maria Popova have been officially added to our pitch list. I will do my best to have them on 3 Books. Thank you so much for your love, Vicky. Okay. And now it is time for the word of the chapter. And for this chapter's word, let's go back to Andrea. 18 hours of survival sex work.
Yes. So I'm being a little bit hyperbolic.
Yes, indeed, it is hyperbolic. What does that word mean? Hyperbole, hyperbolic, Hyperbole, or you can put the IC at the end there. It means extravagant exaggeration. The example Merriam-Webster gives is mile-high ice cream cones. Okay, that's kind of interesting. We kind of maybe knew that, or maybe you didn't, or maybe you did, or maybe you didn't, but hyperbole, hyperbolic, extravagant exaggeration. Okay, fair enough. But the interesting part is how you say this word and where it came from. Merriam-Webster helps us out again. How is hyperbole pronounced and why? This word does not behave the way we expect a word that's spelled this way to behave. It begins with the prefix hyper, which we know in words like hyperlink have an emphasis on the first syllable, like hyper, not on the second, like hyperbole. And then there's that B-O-L-E, the bowl part, B-O-L-E. It should sound like the word bowl, like eat an ice cream out of a bowl, right? Nope. Instead, it's two symbols, bully, hyperbole. What a weird sounding word. Well, the word comes to English directly from Latin, but the Latin word comes from a Greek word that has one crucial visual difference that did not make it all the way to English. It has a line called a macron, M-A-C-R-O-N, over the final E. So the original spelling in Greek is hyperbole with a straight line over the last E. The macron, the straight line, tells us that the vowel is pronounced like an E, the long sound. Hyperbole, more on etymology here, comes from 15th century from Latin, which is from Greek again, which means a throwing beyond. Interesting. Hyper means beyond. You can kind of picture that. Hyper, like beyond, like you're super hyper, you're super beyond your normal state, whatever. Bole, B-O-L-E, means a throwing, a casting, the throwing of a missile, a bolt, or a beam. To throw, like throwing a bolt. Hyperbole is like throwing beyond. Literally means throwing beyond. Hyperbole, throwing beyond. A weird and strange pronounced word that means extreme exaggeration, like mile-high ice cream cones. Okay. That was a new piece of knowledge for me, hopefully for you as well. And that brings us to the end of chapter 49. This is a journey, a quest. We are 2 years in now, almost 2 years exactly, and we started March 2018. It's March 2020, guys. March 2020. We got a lot of years left. We're only in the 800s, but I'm feeling it. I'm feeling your love. I'm feeling your letters. I'm feeling your phone calls. I'm feeling the rising community of people who understand and believe that we need to push a pause button on the craziness, on the busyness, on the freneticness of every day. Beep and buzz and burps and beep. It's just too much. We need to get back into the basics. We need to get back into books. We need to get back into single tasking. We need to get off screens. We need to sink into other consciousnesses, other minds. We got to be into other minds. And we are doing that together. How many people have ever read the Klingon dictionary? Who's heard of chasing the scream? Broadening who we are as people, connecting us to an invisible community around the world of people that believe in no book shame, no book guilt. The power of reading can give us so much love, so much awareness, so much connection in our lives. I feel your love, your awareness, and your connection. I am so humbled to be your navigator as we keep our journey going for 12 more years. Thank you so much for listening to Chapter 49 of 3 Books. And until next time, remember that you are what you eat, and you are what you read. Thank you so much for listening, and keep turning that page.